for somebody to walk in and go, hi. Maybe wear clown makeup, you know. I'm from Seattle. I was on the University of Washington campus several years ago. My daughter was a freshman there, and I dropped some stuff off at her dorm, and I came out. It was late October. It was trying to snow. That's all it was. A handful of flakes were coming out of the sky, and these college kids, I don't know where they're from. They weren't local, but they came running out. They threw themselves to the ground. They started making snow angels. All the rest of the kids come out, hey, look, first it's got a stick. Get up out of the mud, you idiot. Maybe you should have went to Washington State. We don't happen to have any Washington State alums in here, do we? Because I can slow these down if I need to. How many of you have to put up with some snoring? You got a snoring spouse? Where are the hands? Let's see. Come on. Yeah, there we go. Have you heard this? This is an actual theory. This is a real theory. There are some scientists that believe that snoring is a leftover behavior from our caveman days. One of those things we don't need anymore, but at one time it was advantageous. And you guys are looking at me like I'm nuts, but you can imagine if there were predators creeping around the cave and they're going to go down there and grab somebody, but all they can hear is... Sounds too much like growling. And ladies, I want to ask you this. Has it not worked? Guys, next time your wife gives you one of those in the middle of the night, you go, I don't see a pack of wolves in here. This is a thing now. I don't know why it's become such a big selling point in every recipe. Everything contains sea salt. All salt is sea salt. It's always been sea salt. Do we need two words to describe salt? It's like, uh-oh, looks like cloud rain.
Good morning. It's Saturday, June the 17th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Mark-Kaye, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, and Chapter 5 of I the Jury by Mickey-Spillane. All that and more when I come back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Can you see
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Opulent, civilized, and industrious nations are greater consumers than poor ones because they're infinitely greater producers. Jean-Baptiste Say. The cause and effect here is so important. While we can't help but envy consumption and note the satisfaction that consumption of wants brings, we must note that great consumers are always and forever first great producers. The opulence, civility, and industry they enjoy comes only anecdotally from consumption, but at a far deeper level from their capacity for production, which economically makes consumption possible and existentially brings purpose.
Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He knows that the government has no rights. He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative suggested federal political priorities? Number 1, recognize that the government has no rights. 2, defund Planned Parenthood. 3, replace the Affordable Care Act. 4, institute zero-based budgeting. 5, prohibit collective bargaining for all public employees. 6, assign criminal and civil liabilities to all government regulators. 7, immediately repeal the Patriot Act. 8, immediately repeal all emergency dictator laws. 9, reinstate writs of outlawry. 10, use taxpayer funds to sponsor recalls, ballot initiatives, and referendums. 11, create a flexible minimum wage. 12, means test health care. 13, immediately and permanently prohibit investment banking by any office holder. And 14, make nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons obsolete. Back in a minute. Thank you. What are the true conservative cultural priorities? Bring back hierarchy. Bring back the admiration of intelligence, morality, and beauty. Bring back single-income households. Integration, parenting, the primacy of existence, certainty of knowledge, and universal rights and wrongs. Bring back principled behavior, masculinity and femininity. Bring back Adam 12, John F. Kennedy, the gold standard, pre-HMO medical care, and nonprofit news. Bring back civil service, the term stupid question, arguments and fights, the cultural influence of the church and the Boy Scouts. Bring back the influence of social organizations such as the Lions Club and the Rotary Club. Bring back bowling. Back in a minute. Thank you. So now we have Instagram account holder and ersatz or erstwhile conservative mark-kaye.
Bizarre that people think Donald Trump is the only Republican that will meet this kind of ire from the left. It's going to be, in fact, it's already happening to Ron DeSantis. There's a woman named Danae Benton. Hannah, do you know who Danae Benton is?
No.
Yeah, nobody really does. Anyway, but she was at the Tony Award. Were you watching the Tony Awards yesterday?
No, and never have I watched the Tony Awards.
You didn't watch the Tony Awards for excellence in Broadway?
No, yeah, that's for musicals and like plays and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Well, Danae Benton was up. I think she was giving an award or making a speech or something. Listen to what she said about Ron DeSantis.
Earlier tonight, CMU and the Tony Awards presented the 2023 Excellence in Theater Education Award. And while I am certain that the current governor of my home state of Florida will be changing.
Yeah, she called Ron DeSantis on stage, televised, the Grand Wizard of Florida. The Grand Wizard of Florida, which is, of course, a racial epithet. She's comparing him to the leader of the Ku Klux Klan. And that is something that was cheered by the audience, you might point out. I'm not sure where the Tony Awards aired, but I haven't heard any repudiation or statement from the network or the Tony Awards or the Broadway Association of whomever gives these things out. I haven't heard anybody condemn her for getting up there and calling a governor and a candidate for president a racist, a Klansperson. Not just a Klansperson, but the highest ranking Klansperson. And notice I didn't say man, I was gender neutral on it because, Klansperson. I want to play into their whole thing. The Klansperson in chief of the state of Florida, no one denouncing that. That's totally fine. It's totally acceptable. Why? Because it's a Republican. Not Donald Trump, but a Republican. And any Republican is fair game. Any Republican is a racist, is a white supremacist. Remember what The View said about Tim Scott, a black man who pulled himself up from by his bootstraps from the state of South Carolina. Single mom, became a lawyer and a senator and is now running for president, doing a gosh darn good job of it too. That guy is a racist and doesn't understand racism the way Joy Behar does. That guy doesn't understand racism the way Sonny Hotson and Whoopi Goldberg do. Why? He's black. How does he have a different understanding of racism? Oh, it's because he's a Republican. It doesn't matter who you are. White supremacy is the number one thing in these people's minds that is the biggest issue in the United States today. And the white supremacists are all those people who are on the right. They should call them right supremacists because that's basically what they're implying. They will not stop at Donald Trump. These kinds of attacks, these kind of lawsuits, these kinds of indictments, these kind of impeachments will happen every single time a Republican tries to get into a position of power or is in a position of power. And the problem we have in the Republican Party is we've got the power to do the same, and we're not doing it.
And so, again, he's wrong. Shame on you, Mark-Kaye. Shame on you, shame on you, shame on you for promoting left-wing propaganda. That's all you're doing here. You didn't listen, Mr. Kaye. You didn't listen to what she had to say. She didn't accuse anybody of anything. She made a vague, arbitrary statement. The only person in this situation, conversation, whatever you want to call it, that called anybody a racist was you. You're the only one that called him a racist. You're the only one that called him a Klansman. You're the only one that called him a super Klansman, the biggest, highest Klansman on earth. You did that, Mr. Kaye, not the lady at the Tony Awards. She baited you, and you were stupid enough to take the bait. Shame on you. Shame, shame, shame. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Compulsion. Recently, Americans have been looking more critically at the concepts of loyalty and subversion. Deeply conscious of the cynical and ruthless nature of the totalitarian attack through subversion, we have begun to let our fear of subversion from within paralyze our democratic freedoms. We have become so concerned over the specter of a treacherous fifth column in our own land that we have grown both overcautious and oversuspicious. We require constant reassurance that the intentions of our neighbors and fellow citizens are acceptable and loyal. The danger in this frantic search for security operates both on the political and psychological levels. Politically, in trying to erect invulnerable barriers against the spread of totalitarian ideas, we may find that we have given up those very qualities that distinguish democracy from totalitarianism: freedom and diversity. Psychologically, we may find ourselves the victims of pathological suspicions, which can be clinically termed paranoia. And this super suspiciousness may lead us to reject utterly the most valuable qualities we have as human beings: tolerance and respect for our fellow men. The political dangers in this situation have been pointed out time and time again by responsible leaders of the American community. As a psychiatrist, I should like to devote my attention to the psychological aspect of this problem and to the dangers to the free mind that are inherent in the current situation. For, as we have already seen, all political behavior is essentially an extension of individual behavior and is rooted in the psychology of the individuals who make up the political group. Much of our collective suspicion can be attributed to a gigantic multiplication of personal feelings of insecurity. In times of fear and calamity arises the myth of a treacherous aggressor, the myth the totalitarians know so well how to exploit. Our own inner insecurity is displaced and projected onto our neighbors and our environment. We begin to doubt and distrust everyone. We accuse others because we are afraid of ourselves. We feel weak and cover our weakness by growing suspicion and by being continually on the lookout for possible traitors and dissenters. As we have seen earlier, the whole question of loyalty is a complicated one. In our zeal to create guarantees of untrustworthiness, we tend to oversimplify the problem, and thus we may overshoot the mark and become like our totalitarian antagonists, for whom oversimplification is a stock in trade. Asking people for a loyalty oath, asking them to perform that magic ritual through which they forswear all past and future political sin, may have a paradoxical effect. Merely taking an oath does not make a man loyal, although it may later enable a judge to prosecute him for perjury. Our insistence on official expressions of allegiance actually discredits and devalues the basic personal sense of voluntary and self-chosen identification with the community, which is the essence of loyalty. It certainly does not either create or ensure loyalty. The loyalty oath too easily degenerates into an empty formula, and the man who takes it may forget completely the meaning it is supposed to have. To many, it has become simply red tape, another one of those endless, troublesome forms that must be filled out. The oath compulsion can easily grow into a childish magic strategy, a form of mental blackmail. There are some Oriental religions in which devotions are performed through the use of a prayer wheel. When the wheel is set in motion by a flip of the hand, the worshiper has done his job. He need not recite any prayers. He need not think any devout thoughts. The practitioners of these religions no longer have any awareness of the content of their prayers. They are blind subscribers to a ritual whose meaning they have long since forgotten. Signing a loyalty oath can become as empty a gesture as turning the prayer wheel. True loyalty is not a static thing, as we have already seen. It grows and develops with the personality. It has to be rediscovered and re-experienced every day, since it is, essentially, as a result of an inner battle of contending values that man finds his own particular values and loyalties. When a man is compelled to swear to his loyalty, even though he feels it already deeply within him, the compulsion from outside means that he must lay aside his personal right to weigh values and take counsel with his honest principles. It does not matter whether or not the oath is an expression of his true feelings. The element of enforcement that lies behind it has a psychologically weakening effect on the man who takes it. This may seem strange at first glance, but a simple analogy will make it clear. The man who truly loves his wife, for example, does not need repeatedly to swear to his love. He shows it in his action. But if she insists on his swearing, her very insistence, implying as it does that she doubts him, may bring questions to her husband's mind, and he begins to grow confused as to what he really thinks. Both in demanding an oath and in taking it, we perpetuate the ridiculous illusion that enemies can be kept out through this prayer wheel system. The fact is that deliberate traitors, the subversives, are the very ones who are not afraid to disguise their motivations and hide their intentions behind prescribed formulations. Nor are they afraid of perjury charges. They feel no hesitation in signing an oath if it is opportune for them to do so. For them, words and oaths are only tools which have no binding moral value. More important than the demand for loyalty should be the demand for integrity, for steadiness of character, for maturity of aims and motivations. Free man needs loyalty to the self, first of all, and this implies the right to be himself. The man who finds that he is nothing, who feels that everyone, himself included, doubts him, who is inwardly weak, may become an easy prey to all kinds of totalitarian political influences. Loyalty hunts and loyalty oaths may provoke disloyalty to one's personal integrity and to personal freedom, since they create suspicion in ourselves and in others. Freedom is kept upright by the very presence of opposition, even at the risk of nonconformism and scattered subversion. Loyalty comes about as a result of mutual confidence. It cannot be created through compulsion. Any compulsion is, by its very nature, one-sided. Loyalty has to be deserved and won daily through mutual interaction and through contact between leaders and citizens. Because it is based on confidence, loyalty is given spontaneously and of free will. True loyalty cannot be bought or demanded. In investigating the case of the young American soldiers in Korea who were brainwashed and forgot too easily where their loyalty lay, we usually find in their backgrounds how disloyally one of their parents had behaved toward them. In nearly all the so-called pro-communist cases, we find a disturbed youth. It is important that the community investigate its initial loyalty toward these young men. In a democratic state, we should be prepared to adduce convincing facts in support of our own way of life, or to develop new approaches which will reveal the weakness of any subversive system. Prosecution of dissenting ideas, insistence on loyalty according to some prescribed formula. These make it impossible for us to do this and may be the beginning of an unwillingness to argue and persuade. They may even lead to a new form of betrayal, the subtle treason of intellectual detachment, the unwillingness to take responsibility, the treason of doubting relativism, which leads to inaction. It may degenerate into a dangerous form of mental laziness, which can easily be turned into a life of no commitments or into totalitarian submission. The approaches to truth are multifarious, and it is only where there is a clash of opinion that these approaches can be discovered and the right road to truth be found. The danger in loyalty compulsion is, then, that we may conceal mental apathy behind a rigid formula and thus lose sight of the constant need for psychological alertness and the real meaning of loyalty and a free way of life. The mechanical formula of a loyalty oath, because it checks moral alertness and a search for ethical clarification, may be the beginning of the thought control we all fear. True loyalty is a living, dynamic quality. In the subtle choice between loyalty to people and loyalty to principles, usually a much vaguer feeling, the lawmaker has to leave the individual as free as possible, because the latter type of loyalty is based on the first. Without personal loyalty, there is no national loyalty. There is still another aspect to this problem. We must learn to distinguish between disloyalty in actions and disloyalty in feelings and thought. Subversion of opinion is never a crime. The right to dissent is the keystone of democracy. In a free state, we must be willing to correct subversion by our better arguments. Persecuting dissenting ideas is a form of mental laziness. Psychologically speaking, a government cannot concern itself with conscious motivations and the unconscious motivations which cannot be separated from them, of people, because inwardly everybody has contrasting motivations. The quandary that such a government would provide itself is illustrated by the following quotation from the Oppenheimer hearing of the Gray Board, published in 1954. We believe that it has been demonstrated that the government can search its own soul, and the soul of an individual whose relationship to his government is in question, with full protection of the rights and interests of both. We believe that loyalty and security can be examined within the framework of the traditional and inviolable principles of American justice. In these beautiful phrases lie hidden all the ominous beginnings of totalitarian thought control. The government that searches the soul of any thinking individual can always find a case against him, because doubt, ambivalence, and groping are traits common to all men. We cannot measure anybody's dependability on the basis of his thoughts and feelings as they appear to us. In the first place, we can never know what lies behind a seemingly loyal facade. In the second place, the man whose search for truth leads him to explore many heretical points of view can be the most loyal in his actions. His very exploration may well lead him to the considered judgment that underlies true loyalty. What counts in any man is the consistency and integrity of his behavior and his courage in taking a stand, not his conformity to official dogma. And to state that the government can search its own soul is to state absolutely nothing. A government is, after all, merely a collection of individuals. Under the pressure of the loyalty compulsion, of the growing suspicion, these individuals themselves may not search their souls as honestly as they would in less hectic times, or if they were acting as private individuals rather than official representatives of the government. The man caught in official security rules is the prisoner of the anxiety and insecurity rampant in those who want to establish the delusion of certainty and security, a transgression of values. As soon as the government starts to search the souls of its citizens, it begins to intrude on their rights and interests. It attacks democracy at home and weakens its position abroad. We cannot find the road to peace and fellowship with the rest of the world if we adopt dogmatic, intransigent positions and try to impose our orthodoxy on others. The hallmark of the totalitarian is his insistence that his is the only right way. If we are to maintain our position as the leader of the free world, we must always keep our minds open. Only in that way will we find new ways to peace. We've seen now that the problem of treachery has to deal with the failure to understand our inner mental processes. Every betrayal is, in the first place, a self-betrayal, a disloyalty toward one's own standards. When people silence their conscience and compromise for the sake of convenience, at that moment, they begin to be disloyal to themselves. Passivity, assumed when our conscience should have forced us to act, is the most common form of self-betrayal. Inwardly, a man may be furious because of some injustice he's witnessed, but outwardly, he may do nothing about it. This behavior he feels inwardly is treason to the self, and is often what makes him so touchy toward other people's flaws. When the pattern of passivity is repeated, the individual continuously piles up more feelings of injustice and grows more and more resentful against society. Evasiveness and skillful dodging of issues of principle, these are among the most dangerous forms of self-betrayal in our time. They are dangerous because they lead unwittingly to the hypocrisy that puts power beyond ethical value. It is dangerous to let personal grudges and discontent solidify into a permanent resentment against the whole of society. Parents and educators can forestall such difficulties through psychological insight by allowing each individual the freedom to criticize and attack, in a civilized, non-destructive way, the community to which he belongs. By helping to develop in the child the sense that he is responsible for his own views, subversive though they may temporarily appear, parents provide him with the opportunity to overcome his feelings of loneliness and ambivalence, and his wish to do violence to those who influence him. Again, loyalty is a relationship. Loyalty to family, friends, or a country has to be deserved. Loyalty is possible only when mutual mental aggression and hostility are allowed and tolerated within the limits of the law. This verbalized, sublimated, and civilized form of aggression presupposes fairness and good sportsmanship. It is the synthesis and conquest of rebellion and subversion. However paradoxical it may sound, democracy is founded on the mutual loyalty of politically opposed groups. You cannot doubt the good motives and intentions of your opponents without undermining the basis for cooperation and successful government. It is most undemocratic to impute disloyalty to the opposition party. History shows that only where there is opportunity to confront and integrate opposing ideas can man eradicate that form of psychological imbalance which gradually turns into a disloyalty to oneself and to the community. Fear of subversion and opposition is often fear of ideas, fear of being identified with certain unacceptable ideas, fear of betrayal of the hidden part of oneself. Fear of treason will exist as long as loyal opposition is a crime. Democracy's nonconformity. It is mutual loyalty, even when we have to attack one another's ideas. Ideas which, because they are always human, are always incomplete.
Chapter 5. Downstairs, Pat and I went across the street to a tiny delicatessen and sat in a booth with 2 bottles of beer. He asked me if I had gotten anywhere yet, and I had to give him a negative answer. "What about motive?" I put to him. "I'm up the creek on that angle, mainly because I haven't looked into it. When I get all the case histories down, I'll begin on the motive. But did you dig up anything yet?" "Not yet," Pat answered. "Ballistics checked on the slug, and it came from an unidentified .45. According to the experts, the barrel was nearly new. We followed that up by inquiring into the sale of all guns, but got nowhere. Only 2 had been sold, both to store owners who were recently robbed. We took some samples of the slugs, but they didn't match. For that matter, it might have been a gun sold some time ago, but unfired until recently, I said. We thought of that too. Records still don't account for it. None of those at the party have ever owned a gun to our knowledge. Officially, I added. Yes, that's a possibility. It isn't hard to come in possession of a gun. What about the silencer? The killer was no novice about firearms. A silencer plus a dum-dum. He wanted to make sure Jack died. Not too fast. Just definitely died. Well, no trace of that either. Where it may have come from is a rifle. There are a few makes of rifle silencers that can be adjusted to a .45. We sipped the beer slowly, each of us thinking hard. It was a full 2 minutes before Pat remembered something and said, "Oh yeah, almost forgot. Kalecki and the Kynes kid moved into an apartment in town this morning." Well, that was news. What for? Someone took a shot at him through his window late last night. Missed by a hair. It was a .45 slug, too. We checked it with the one that killed Jack. It was the same gun. I almost choked on my beer. You almost forgot, I said with a smirk. Oh, and one other thing. What? He thinks you did it. I banged my glass down on the table so hard Pat jumped. Why, that dirty sniveling louse. That does it. This time I'll smash his face all over the place. There you go, racing your motor again, Mike. Sit down and pipe down. As he said, he wasn't without a little influence at City Hall, and they made us look into you. But don't forget, you've knocked off a few undesirable citizens before, and the slugs from your gun were photographed. We keep all the prints and tried in the worst way to match them, but they don't match. Besides, we knew where you were last night. They raided the joint 10 minutes after you left. I got kind of red in the face and sat down. You got one hell of a way of breaking things to me, Pat. Now, let's quit the joking and tell me where Kalecki and company moved to. Pat grinned. They live right around the corner in the same apartment hotel the Bellamy twins occupy, but on the second floor, the Midworth Arms. Have you been there yet? Not to see the twins. I saw George and Hal, though. Had quite a time telling him that it would do no good to place a charge against you for assault and battery after the other night. Didn't take much talking either. Evidently, he's heard a lot about the way you operate, but just likes to keep his own courage up with a lot of talk. Both of us poured down the remainder of the beer and got up to leave. I outfumbled Pat and got stuck for the check. Next time he'd buy, cop or no cop. We parted outside the door, and as soon as he took off, I started around the corner for the Midworth Arms. I wanted to get the lowdown when anyone accused me of murder, attempted or successful. The real reason why Pat was sure it wasn't me was because the killer missed. I wouldn't have. I knew Kalecki probably had tipped the doorman and the super off not to admit me, so I didn't bother messing with them. Instead, I walked in like a regular resident and took the elevator to the second floor. The operator was a skinny runt in his late 20s who wore a built-in leer. I was the only one in the car, and when we stopped, I pulled a bill from my pocket and showed him the color of it. Kalecki. George Kalecki. He's new in this dump. What apartment? And the green is yours, I said. He gave me a careful going over that one. Finally put his tongue in his cheek and said, You must be that hammer mug. You give me a 10 not to spot him for you. I opened my coat and pulled my .45 from its holster. The kid's eyes popped when he saw it. I am that hammer mug, Junior, I told him. And if you don't spot him for me, I'm giving you this. I motioned toward his teeth with the gun barrel. The front 206, he said hastily. My bill was a 5. I rolled it up in a ball and poked it in his wide-opened mouth, then shoved the rod back. The next time, remember me. And in the meantime, act like a clam, or I'll open you up like one. Yes, sir. He practically leaped back in the car and slammed the door shut. 206 was down the hall, the apartment facing on the street. I knocked, but there was no answer. Hardly breathing, I put my ear against the wood paneling of the door and kept it there. That way, the wood acts as a sounding board, and any noise made inside is magnified 100 times. That is, except this time. Nobody was home. Just to be sure, I slid a note under the door then walked away and took the stairs down to the first landing. There, I took off my shoes and tiptoed back up. The note was still sticking out exactly as I had placed it. Instead of fooling around, I brought out a set of skeleton keys. The third one did it. I snapped the deadlock on the door behind me, just in case. The apartment was furnished. None of Kalecki's personal stuff was in the front room, except a picture of himself on the mantel when he was younger. I walked into the bedroom. It was a spacious place, with 2 chests of drawers and a table. But there was only one bed. So they did sleep together. I had to laugh, even if I did mention it to get a rise out of them before. A suitcase was under the bed. I opened that first. On top of 6 white shirts, a .45 was lying, with 2 spare clips beside it. Man, oh man, that caliber gun is strictly for professionals, and they were turning up all over the place. I sniffed the barrel, but it was clean. As far as I could tell, it hadn't been fired for a month. I wiped my prints off and put the gun back. There wasn't much in the chest of drawers either. Hal Kynes had a photo album that showed him engaging in nearly every college sport there is. A lot of the shots were of women, and some of them weren't half bad. That is, if you like them tall and on the thin side. Me, I like them husky. Toward the end of the book were several showing Kalecki and Hal together. In one, they were fishing. Another was taken alongside a car in camping clothes. It was the third one that interested me. Both Hal and Kalecki were standing outside a store. In this one, Hal wasn't dressed like a college kid at all. In fact, he looked quite the businessman. But that wasn't the point, yet. In the window behind him was one of those news releases they plant in stores facing the street that are made up of a big photo with a caption below it. There were 2. One was indiscernible, but the other was the burning of the Morro Castle. And the Morro Castle went up in flames 8 years ago. Yet here was Hal Kynes looking older than he looked now. I didn't get any more time to look around. I heard the elevator doors slam, and I walked into the front room. When I got there, someone was fiddling at the lock. There was a steady stream of curses before I clicked up the deadlock and opened the door. "Come in, George," I said. He looked more scared than amazed. Apparently, he really believed that it was me who took the shot at him. Hal was behind him, ready to run as soon as I made one move. George recovered first. "Where do you get off breaking into my apartment? This time, oh, shut up and come in. It's just as monotonous for me. If you'd stay home a while, you'd be better off." The 2 of them stamped into the bedroom. When he came out, he was red as a beet. I didn't give him a chance to accuse me of anything. "Why all the artillery?" I asked him. "For guys like you," he snarled. "For guys that try potting me through a window. Besides, I have a permit to carry it." "Okay, you got a permit. Just be sure you know who you use that rod on." "Don't worry, I'll give you a warning first. Now, if you don't mind, will you tell me what you're doing here?" "Sure, Sonny. I want the lowdown on the bang-bang. Since I was the one accused of it, I'd like to know just what I was supposed to have done." George slid a cigar from its wrapper and inserted it in a holder. He took his time lighting it up before he spoke. "You seem to have police connections," he said finally. "Why don't you ask them?" "Because I don't like secondhand information. And if you're smart, you'll talk. That gun was the killer's gun, and I want the killer. You know that, but that isn't all. The killer made one try and missed, so you can bet your boots there'll be another." Kalecki took the cigar out of his mouth. Little lines of fear were racing around his eyes. The guy was scared. He tried to hide it, but he didn't do very well. A nervous tick tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I still see nothing I can tell you that would help. I was sitting in the big chair by the window. The first thing I knew, the glass shattered beside me, and the bullet hit the back of the chair. I dropped to the floor and crawled to the wall to be out of sight of whoever fired the shot." "Why?" I said slowly. "Why? To save myself, of course. You don't think I was just going to sit there and get shot at, do you?" Kalecki gave me a look of contempt, but I ignored it. "Hey, you don't get the point, George," I told him. "Why were you shot at to begin with?" Little beads of sweat were popping out on his forehead. He wiped his brow nervously. "How should I know? I've made enemies in my time." "This was a very particular enemy, George. This one killed Jack, too, and he's coming back after you. He may not miss the next time. Why are you on his list?" He was really jumpy now. I don't know. Honest, I don't. He was almost apologetic the way he spoke now. I tried to think it out, but I don't get anywhere. That's why I moved to the city. Where I was, anyone could get to me. At least here, there are other people around. I leaned forward. You didn't think enough. You and Jack had something in common. What was it? What did you know that Jack did? What did you have on somebody that Jack might have tumbled to? When you answer that question, you'll have your killer. Now, do I bang your head on the floor to help you remember? Or do you do it yourself? He stood up straight and paced across the room. The thought of being on a kill list had him half bugs. He just wasn't as young as he used to be. This sort of thing got him down. I can't say. If there's anything, it's a mistake. I didn't know Jack long. Hal knew him. He met him through Miss Manning. If you can figure out a tie-up in there, I'll be glad to tell you what I know. Do you think I want to get knocked off? Well, that was an angle I had forgotten about. Hal Kynes was still sitting in the armchair beside the mantelpiece, dragging heavily on a cigarette. For an athlete, he wasn't holding to training rules at all. I still couldn't get the picture of Hal out of my mind, the one taken 8 years ago. He was only a young punk, but that shot made him look like an old man. I don't know. Maybe it was an abandoned store that had the picture in it for years. Okay, Hal, let's hear what you know. The kid turned his head toward me, giving me an excellent view of his Greek god profile. George mentioned everything. How do you know Miss Manning? I asked him. When did you meet her? After all, a babe like that plays ball in a bigger league than you can pay admission to see. Oh, she came to school last year and gave a lecture on practical psychology. That's when I'm majoring in. She had several students visit her clinic in New York to see her methods. I was one of them. She became interested in me and assisted me no end. That's all. It wasn't hard to see why she'd become interested in him. It made me mad to think of it, but he could have been right. Maybe it was purely professional interest. After all, a woman like that could have just about any male she wanted, including me. I went on. And what about Jack? When did you meet him? Shortly afterwards. Miss Manning took me to his apartment for supper with him and Myrna. I got involved in a drunken brawl right after a football game. It was the last one of the season, and all training rules were off. I guess we all went a bit too far, but we wrecked a joint. Jack knew the proprietor, and instead of turning us in, made us pay for the place. The following week, I was studying the case history of a homicidal maniac in the city wards when I met him again. He was glad to see me, and we had dinner together. We became rather good friends in a short time. I was glad to know him, because he helped me immensely. The type of work I was doing involved visits to places where I ordinarily would not have access to, but with his help, I managed to get to them all. For the life of me, I couldn't make anything out of it. Jack never spoke too much about anyone. Our association had started by having an interest in police work, and our friendship had developed over firing ranges, ballistics tables, and fingerprint indexes. Even in the Army, we had thought about it. Life on the side was only incidental. He'd mentioned his friends. That's about all. Myrna I knew very well. Kalecki from his underworld contacts. The Bellamy twins from the newspapers mostly. And the short time I had seen them before. There was nothing more to be gained by hanging around here. I slapped my hat back on and walked toward the door. Neither of them thought to say so long, so I stepped out and slammed the door as hard as I could. Outside, I wondered when George had gotten hold of the .45. Pat had said none of those at the party had ever owned a gun. Yet George had one and a permit to carry it. Or at least he said so. Well, if anything cropped up where a .45 was involved, I'd know where to look first. The Bellamy twins lived on the 5th floor. Their apartment was in the same position as Kalecki's. The only difference was that they answered the bell. The door had a chain lock on the inside, and a plain but vaguely pretty face was meeting mine through the 6-inch opening. Yes? I couldn't tell which of the twins I was speaking to, so I said, Miss Bellamy? She nodded. I'm Mr. Hammer, private investigator. I'm working on the Williams case. Could you... Oh, why, of course. The door closed and the chain removed from the lock. When the door opened again, I was facing a woman that had athlete written all over her. Her skin was brown from the sun, except for the wrinkle spots beside her eyes, and her arms and shoulders were as smooth-muscled as a statue's. This one certainly didn't have justice done her by her photos. For a moment, it struck me why they were having any trouble finding husbands. As far as I could see, there wasn't anything wrong with this particular twin that the money she had couldn't cover. Plenty of guys would take her without any cash settlement at all. Won't you come in? Thank you. I stepped inside and surveyed the place. Not much different from Kalecki's, but it had a light perfume smell instead of a cigar odor. She led me to a pair of divans separated by a coffee table and waved toward one. I sat down and she took the other. Now, what is it you wish to see me about? Oh, perhaps you better tell me which Miss Bellamy I'm speaking to, so I won't get my twins crossed. Oh, I'm Mary, she laughed. Esther has gone shopping, which means she's gone for the day. Well, I guess you can tell me all I need to know. Has Mr. Chambers been to see you yet? Yes, and he told me to expect you, too. I won't have much to ask. You knew Jack before the war, didn't you? She acknowledged with a nod. Did you notice anything particular the night of the party? I continued. No, nothing. Light drinking and a little dancing. I saw Jack talking rather earnestly to Myrna a few times, and once he and Mr. Kynes went out in the kitchen for about 15 minutes. But they came back laughing as though they'd been telling jokes. Did any of the others team up at all? No, not to speak of. Myrna and Charlotte had a conference for a while, but the boys broke it up when the dancing started. I think they were talking about Myrna's wedding plans. What about afterwards? We had a bite to eat, and then came home. Both of us had forgotten our keys, as usual, and had to wake the super up to let us in. Both of us went right to bed. I knew nothing about the murder until a reporter awakened us with a phone call to get a statement. We expected a visit from the police at once, and stayed at home to receive them, but no one came until today. She stopped short and cocked her head a little. Oh, she said, you must excuse me. I left the water running in the tub. She ran to the narrow hallway and disappeared into the bathroom. Maybe I was getting old. I didn't hear any water running. A couple of magazines were lying in a rack beside the divan. I picked one up and thumbed through it, but it was one of those pattern and fashion jobs without any pictures, and I dropped it. 2 new copies of Confessions were on the bottom of the pile. These were better than the rest, but still the same old story. One was a humdinger about a gal that meets a detective in a big city. He does her dirt and she tries to throw herself in front of a subway train. Some nice young jerk grabs her in time and makes a respectable woman of her. I had just gotten to where he was leading her to the justice of the peace when Mary Bellamy came back. Only this time, she made my head swim. Instead of the gray suit she had on before, she wore a sheer pink negligee that was designed with simplicity as the motif. Her hair was down out of the roll, and her face looked clean and strong. Whether or not she planned it, I don't know, but she passed momentarily in front of the light streaming in from the window, and I could see through everything she had on. And it wasn't much, just the negligee. She smiled and sat down beside me. I moved over to make some room. I'm sorry I had to leave you, but the water wouldn't stay hot very long. That's all right. Most women take all day at that. She laughed again. Not me. I was too anxious to hear more about this case you're working on. She crossed her legs and leaned forward to pick a cigarette from the box on the table. I had to turn my head. At this stage of the game, I couldn't afford to get wrapped up with the love life. Besides, I wanted to see Charlotte later. Smoke? She offered. No thanks. She leaned back against the divan and blew a ring at the ceiling. What else can I tell you? I can speak both for my sister and myself, since we were together until the next evening. The sight of her in that carelessly draped sheer fabric kept my mind from what she was saying. Of course, you can check with my sister later, she added. Exactly as Mr. Chambers did. No, that won't be necessary. Those details are minor. What I'm after now are the seemingly unimportant ones. Personality conflicts. Things you might have noticed about Jack the past few days. Any remark that might have been passed, or something you overheard. I'm afraid I can't help you there. I'm not very good at eavesdropping, and I don't collect gossip. My sister and I have remained fairly isolated in our home, that is, until we came to town. Our circle of friendship reaches out to our neighbors who like isolation as much as we do. Rarely do we entertain guests from the city. Mary drew her legs up under her on the divan and turned on her side to face me. During the process, the negligee fell open, but she took her time to draw it shut. Deliberately, she let my eyes feast on her lovely bosom. What I could see of her stomach was smooth, parallel rows of light muscles, almost like a man's. I licked my lips and said, "How long do you expect to remain in town?" She smiled. "Just long enough so Esther can get her shopping spree over with. Her main joy in living is wearing pretty clothes, regardless of whether or not she's seen in them." "And yours?" "My main joy in living is living." 2 weeks ago, I couldn't picture her saying that, but I could now. Here was a woman to whom time and place didn't mean a damn thing. "Tell me," I started, "how can you tell the difference between you and your sister?" "One of us has a small strawberry birthmark on the right hip." "Which one?" "Why don't you find out?" Brother, this girl was asking for trouble. "Not today. I have work to do." I stood up and stretched. "Don't be a sissy," she said. Her eyes were blazing into mine. They were violet eyes, a wild, blazing violet. Her mouth looked soft and wet and provocative. She was making no attempt to keep the negligee on. One shoulder had slipped down, and her brown skin formed an interesting contrast with the pink. I wondered how she got her tan. There were no strap marks anywhere. She uncrossed her legs deliberately and squirmed like an overgrown cat, letting the light play with the ripply muscles in her naked thighs. I was only human. I bent over her, taking her mouth on mine. She was straining in the divan to reach me, her arms tight around my neck. Her body was a hot flame. The tip of her tongue searched for mine. She quivered under my hands wherever I touched her. Now I knew why she hadn't married. One man could never satisfy her. My hand fastened on the hem of the negligee, and with one motion flipped it open, leaving her body lean and bare. She let my eyes search every inch of her brown figure. I grabbed my hat and jammed it on my head. "It must be your sister who has the birthmark," I told her as I rose. "See you later." I half expected to hear a barrage of nasty words when I went through the door, and was disappointed. Instead, I heard a faint, faraway chuckle. I would love to have known how Pat reacted to that act. It had dawned on me all of a sudden that she was left in my path as a sort of booby trap, while Pat went on his own way. I'd wrap that guy up for this little trick. There was a neat tomato down on 3rd Avenue who loved to play tricks herself, especially against the police. Later, perhaps.
Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.